Before we start, I'd like you guys to subscribe, comment, like, share, interact with the video and the channel any way you can. It helps me out a lot. Thank you for visiting the borough. I've been on the internet for a long time, and on the computer by itself for longer, and I really wonder how many people actually remember the way it felt to have a computer as a kid in like 2003, or were even around for it. How there was more than just social media, and the internet actively had a wide array of stuff for kids and young adults alike growing up in the 2000s. Flash games and network websites and places we probably shouldn't have been going to. Nobody born past 2010 is going to understand what a shock site was, and for the love of God be thankful for it. It's so interesting to see how everything has changed over the span of nearly 2 decades. The parts of my childhood that have been made up of beeps and boops are fragile, and while I understand why these parts of the internet and computers are shattered and obsolete, predators, viruses, spyware, and the idea of unsupervised internet is nothing I would wish on any child at this point, hypocritical as it is, I still feel so bad that these places are not here for anyone anymore. So believe it or not, one of my favorite things to do is talk about and revisit my childhood experiences. You guys read the title, you know where I'm going with this. I want to talk about the progression of landmarks on the internet from the perspective of child me growing up. I want to reminisce and have you listen as I spin tales of the digital age in the early 2000s. They are important parts of my childhood, and at the expense of feeling old, I feel like sometimes we all need a dose of nostalgia. Maybe a dose of our antidepressants while we're at it. I discovered the actual internet at a bit of a young age, say like 6 or 7, and stumbled on some sites related to the TV networks I would watch. Nick, Disney, and CartoonNetwork.com were a child's bread and butter if you grew up with internet access as a child. Since the quiet shutdown of CartoonNetwork.com and the decline that all 3 sites have taken, I never see much of what I saw when I was growing up anymore. The closest is Nick.com, but even that's lacking. It really is unfortunate, but instead of lamenting, I want to at least cover these with fondness for their foundation. You were able to go to all 3 of these sites and not only watch clips, but maybe even full episodes of shows on demand, sometimes web-only exclusive shows that often got greenlit into full shows later, such as the case of Making Fiends and Mr. Meaty. Flash plugin was still, alive, and provided us with games that still get talked about today in a collaborative nostalgia session that only early 2000s kids playing Sandwich Stacker would have. I remember sitting at the computer for hours and trying my hardest to beat Harem Scarum despite being unable to comprehend what I needed to be doing to actually play the game and learn from my mistakes, and, for lack of a better word, being dumb goo goo gaga baby brained. You could also make calendars or cards using the print feature for a couple of these sites. That's actually kind of a common thing for a lot of these sites and a lot of programs and applications from the early 2000s. This also carried over to certain brand names. If you put in Pokemon.com in like 2006, you'd have a cool website with the ability to look up Pokemon, play some music, and be a part of some fan club to play trivia. That totally wasn't me. If you went to Bratz.com, you could play the silly horse game where you give it a makeover, go to Neopets and you have a free pet to abandon, and fun games and gambling to do every day, and so on and so forth. There was a plethora of activities you could do on these sites that were, at the very least, safe and meant for children, and not chat room based, which is unfortunately something I don't see a lot of anymore in an age where we shut out a lot of kids no matter if they're online or outside, making the only thing left for them being YouTube and social media. But that's not the topic today. Speaking of places for kids, Webkins gets an honorable mention in the midst of this in the next topic because I feel like it's a special case of weird corporate nonsense that was just a big part of me and many people's lives in a somewhat positive way. Webkins used to be locked behind a paywall and you'd have to have a code that was only available on the tag of a stuffed Webkins animal produced by Gaines. And while I understand the gimmick was supposed to be cute, holy shit, did my mom do a lot to make sure I fit in just a little more with my class. Those things were expensive. It wasn't going to make me any less neurodivergent, Mom, but I appreciate your willingness to help in those times. It did offer a lot of things like a decoratable house, videos to watch and even make, games to win money in, game shows, gem hunting, strategy games like pool and checkers and communities with other Webkins players, and gambling! I just don't think it was fair to leave this one out. It did take control over my life for quite a while and was a staple in many others who could afford it, even if it was just one pet. Plus, the paywall is gone now. You can still do most of the things I was talking about by downloading classic Webkins on their original site, which I recommend just to have a nice, colorful place to occupy yourself after the disaster of their sequel. Because I've been talking about Flash games as a whole already, it's only right it gets its own independent segment. I've been talking about early childhood things for the longest time in this video, and I know it's taken a minute to get here, but when we talk about the internet culture in the early 2000s, usually people mean forums, chat rooms, and the plethora of Flash games and animations you were able to witness and enjoy. And while Flash games was a very loose term, involving many different genres and ratings that didn't apply in this wild west world of independent development, so long as they were made in Flash for a Flash plugin, this area of the internet was often enjoyed by teens, in computer labs, tabs and young adults getting away from their boring work. You type something you wanted to play or just games and something in ye olde Google, and you'd usually end up on some site that had old Flash retro games and video sites like Cool Math Games, or some site that had an exuberant amount of ads, or Newgrounds, which was surprisingly both a video and game site, but it acted kind of like a YouTube before YouTube, and it celebrated original and often creative and mostly edgy content made by users in the site, some of which is still beloved and still being added on to this day. There was a small chance you'd find something else somewhere in these sites and searches, but that was just par for the course when your only information came from the shitty kid on the playground. And just as an extended measure before we move on to the next segment, allow me to list some Flash games I would play as a kid to really rake in that nostalgia. Ultimate Flash Sonic, Tails' Nightmare, Happy Wheels, Fancy Pants, Alien Hominid, Super Meat Boy, Fire Boy and Water Girl, Duck Life, those weird PETA games that tried to get you to stop playing Nintendo games but in reality were kind of fun. Learn to Fly, Henry Stickmin, the games you and I should never have been playing. You know the ones. Fishy. Weirdly enough, those games that made you roleplay as a doctor specialist and made you perform surgery on various patients. Various dress-up games and character creators, and special shout out to HomestarRunner.com because they have been independent creatives just doing animations and making games for more than 2.5 decades at this point, and they're still on brand and funny. I've been talking about it for a while. I keep talking about it in between these little segments, and at the expense of getting into more legally gray territory, I'd like to just say that sailing in the seven seas was both a huge issue in the early 2000s and so much of a non-issue that just ended up being unenforceable to this day. A lot of islands, like LimeWire and Napster, were all there for you to set sail for your treasure. Of course, there was always a chance for hidden viruses and malware on your journey to bringing home treasure. The treasure being the entire Sonic 06 OST and Pokemon 2B and Master album. As a kid, the internet was the absolute Wild West. Very little regulation, very little supervision, meaning I could type in something on Ask Jeeves or Google and get the result closest to my inquiry. And as a result of Google not inventing safe search yet, if that inquiry of, say, Sonic the Hedgehog ended up showing me instead Sonic's big blue blur, then, well, I can't do much about that. Now can I? And it was like that for a lot of things. You'd sometimes see unmentionable things just by chance on Google search after typing in something wrong, or clicking an ad, or playing a game, or even hearing John Cornside talk about it on the playground. And it just didn't have to be the unmentionable. It was anything that tended to be unsightly, so to speak. Basically, if you're near or about the age of 25 and I can show you this image and you have any sort of reaction to it, I'm sorry that Google cannot spare you, my child. Those of you who are younger than 18 were never around for the likes of Blue Waffle, Two Girls, One Cup, and One Man, One Jar, and while people on the internet are desensitized to these topics now, and arguably may have invented worse sites and given you worse content, they live on forever for their initial shock factor. To end the stroll down memory lane, I have to talk about YouTube. I won't talk too much about social media. I don't feel like my experiences have a place with social media. Just YouTube. YouTube was an interesting thing to watch grow. Just it being new and small with a niche viewer base, then suddenly being able to make money and becoming much more viral and professional, to being this booming market that anyone with a thought and opinion could be trying to get in on. I don't know how else to describe it other than interesting. I was around when the site let you message people and customize your channel page like a Tumblr blog. Fred was still a huge new thing and about to get a substantial network deal for being the character he portrayed, and it was a long time before PewDiePie or the saturation of gaming channels even remotely happened. This era of YouTube was all about parody. Make fun of some media, make fun of some game, make fun of some other video, and make fun of some person. Laugh at yourself. YouTube poops, animation, anything. In fact, animation made it big here. If your name was Egoraptor, or Domix, or Machinima, or if you just made silly out there animations with bad voice acting, if you were just a good personality, you were usually beloved. I've watched the subscribe button go from here to here to here. I've watched features come and features go. I watched the rise of Twitch. I watched YouTube adapt to every single change. I watched people's videos change and the algorithm change and the layout change and the rules change more times than I can count. But it adapted and creators became more creative and many things survived and some things evolved. And I think this website is beautiful for that. Is it weird to get it sort of emotionally attached to a website like that? I guess I'd have to ask myself the same question for everything before this segment. All I know is I've invested so much time and attributed a lot of energy into this website, as I have every other website and application I mentioned, as I have these games and as I have these videos. It's one of those things that's just, in general, odd to reminisce on execution. That leaves me with this. What we have now. While the internet feels less glamorous than we had it back then, less colorful, I still feel like we made strides in our technology. I have the ability to play and do and make whatever I want on this little box. That's still there. It evolved, expanded, and created this larger bubble for itself. While I can't help but agree the stage for social media is awfully toxic in of itself, I try to look at the positives of it all. And I think the utmost positive is the strides our creativity has taken.